Today, we're going to dig into the deep past of ancient Rome. And you know what? We're going to uncover a pretty startling story. It turns out the money in your pocket, its roots aren't in simple, friendly trade. Nope, they're in debt, brutal power dynamics, and even social revolution. All right, let's get into it.
So, what if getting into debt could cost you your actual freedom? I mean, really think about that. A world with no cash, where an IOU isn't just a piece of paper, it's a literal claim on your body. This wasn't some hypothetical sci-fi scenario. For countless early Romans, this was the brutal, day-to-day reality, and it was this exact crisis that forced the invention of money as we know it.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with debt, chains, and copper. Then we'll see a revolution in silver. After that, we'll look at a whole new logic of value, see how capital's hand became invisible, and finally, track the journey from actual prisons to financial profits. Okay, so let's set the scene. Before the first Roman coin was ever even minted, debt was it was a very personal and very dangerous affair. This wasn't about numbers in some abstract ledger. It was about raw power, wielded directly by one person over another.
And this wasn't just a rare thing that happened to a few unlucky people. The historian Niebuhr pointed out that the power of a creditor to literally take a debtor into servitude if they couldn't pay, well, that was incredibly widespread. Think about that. If you couldn't pay up, your creditor didn't just take your house or your tools, they took you.
And you can really see the massive gap between the classes here. If you were a plebeian, a regular person, debt was a direct threat to your freedom. But for the wealthy patricians, their legal titles gave them the right to seize not just your stuff, but your labor, your body. And how were payments made? With something called aes grave, which literally means heavy copper. You had to physically weigh out these big chunks of copper for every single transaction. Super clumsy.
Get this, the sources are totally clear on this point. Every patrician's home was, for all intents and purposes, a private prison. The law was on their side. Creditors could legally throw debtors into chains right there in their own houses and even dish out physical punishment. We're talking about power that was immediate, physical, and just absolute.
So this already brutal system gets pushed right to the breaking point by a huge economic shock. New trade routes open up, and suddenly there's a flood of foreign silver coming into Rome. What does that do? It makes the value of their local copper just plummet. So think about it like this. Say you borrowed 1 pound of copper. You're legally on the hook to pay back the value of that copper. But now, because of all the new silver, that value is suddenly 5 times higher. Your debt just exploded overnight. Repayment became totally impossible, and thousands of people were forced into servitude. So you've got Rome, teetering on the brink of collapse. The whole social fabric is just ripping apart because of this massive debt crisis. And the solution? It wasn't just some new law, it was a piece of radical new technology, a standardized coin.
But before we get to the coin, look at what happened right before it was introduced. This is wild. Before they came up with a monetary solution, the Roman elite's answer was, well, it was war. I'm not kidding. They used war as an economic tool. They would literally start conflicts just to give debtors a way to earn a soldier's wage to pay off their debts. And of course, it also opened up new lands and resources for the creditors. It was this violent, brutal release valve for a totally broken system.
And then came the libella. Now, this wasn't just a shiny piece of silver. It was a work of political genius. The state basically stepped in and said, "See this one, small, easy-to-carry silver coin? It is now legally worth the same as a full 12-ounce pound, a libra, of that old, heavy, devalued copper." This was absolutely revolutionary. For the very first time, value wasn't about the physical weight of something in your hand. It was an abstract idea, guaranteed by the state. And just like that, money was born.
So this new coin did way more than just solve a crisis. It completely changed how Romans thought about work, about value, even about the purpose of life itself. It basically created a whole new economic logic for the world.
And the sources give us this really fascinating contrast. They talk about the Quashis of Jamaica. Now, their whole worldview was based on subsistence. You work to make what you need to live, and then you're done. The rest of your time is for loafing, which they saw as the real luxury in life. The Roman system, now formalized by coins, was the complete opposite. Work wasn't just for survival anymore. It was about producing a surplus, extra stuff, that you could then trade for this new universal thing called money. The goal wasn't just living, it was accumulation.
And that new logic, right there, that idea of exchange value, of working for profit and not just survival, that laid the groundwork for the system we now call capitalism. And the raw power of the creditor? It didn't just vanish over the centuries. No, it just evolved. It became less about physical chains and more about the, invisible chains of a financial system.
Okay, so to really see how this works, let's fast forward about 2,000 years. Now, don't worry about trying to read all the tiny text on this image. It's just an old expense report from a 19th century Glasgow factory. But it is the perfect example of the descendant of that system born in Rome. See, in this world, power isn't a rich patrician physically locking a debtor in this house anymore. It's a much more abstract system of capital, of money, that just circulates through a business to create more and more value. So let's break down what that actually means. All right, so let's say this factory produces 45,000 pounds worth of goods in a year. But where does all that value, that money, actually go? Well, look at this. A whopping 71% of it goes right back into buying more yarn and materials for the next cycle of production. The workers, the people who actually make the stuff, they get about 17% in wages. And the owner's personal profit, it's actually less than 4%. See, the real power here isn't a guy with a whip. It's built into the system itself. It's a cycle where the main goal is just for money to make more money.
So let's pull all these threads together. What we've really been watching is a fundamental transformation in how power and value actually operate in society.
I mean, this is the journey, right? Power started as direct, physical, brutal control over a person's body. Then it became an abstract control, handled through money. And from there, it evolved into systemic control, where an entire economic system, like a factory's balance sheet, automatically does the enforcing and generates the wealth. You could say the prison of the patrician became the profit margin of the capitalist.
And all of this leaves us with a pretty big question for our own time, doesn't it? That Roman invention of abstract value, that's the world we live in. It's the water we all swim in every day. So the next time you get a paycheck or you just look at your bank balance, it's worth taking a second to ask. In a system where value is just a number, what is the real price of our work?